Esau said, Jacob said, would you sell me your firstborn rights? And Esau said, of course I would. They're meaningless. They're nothing to me. As a matter of fact, initially God had wanted that the firstborn should serve in the temple, but it'll come a time that God will take it away from the firstborns and give it to the priestly family. And so what do I need it for? Take it. So Jacob legally acquired the firstborn rights and by giving Esau the lentils. A number of years later, Isaac, their father, was on his deathbed and wanted to bless his child. He wanted to bless Esau. Now Esau, at this point, Isaac was blind. He could no longer see. And Esau, he knew, was a no-goodnik, was up to no good. And Jacob was the goody-goody. He was the simple one, the one who always studied Torah. And he wanted to give these unique blessings to Esau. And so he called Esau and he told Esau, go and fetch me some food, please. And when you come back with some food, I will eat, and then I will give you the blessings. Rebekah, on the other hand, knew that Esau was the bad one, and he was not deserving of the blessings. And so she quickly called Jacob, and she said, Jacob, look, your brother's got to go and hunt, but you don't have to hunt because I have my personal stash of goats in the backyard. So quickly go and take 2 goats, bring them to me. I will prepare them for food for Jacob. And you will go into Jacob's room, into Isaac's room, prepare them for Isaac. You will go into Isaac's room and you will rightfully receive these special blessings because I know that you are truly the one deserving of them. And so, as his mother told him, he goes and gets the 2 kid goats and brings them to his mother. She prepares them. Then he says, hold on. I don't feel like my brother Asaph. I don't sound like him. He's gruff. He's rough at the edges. He's very hairy. And I'm smooth. My hands are smooth. My voice is refined. So his mother says here, put on some hides from animals. And so if your father feels you, he'll actually feel rough skin just like your brother. And he does that. And that's where our class begins. He walks in and Yaakov senses that something's amiss. Isaac. Isaac senses that something's amiss. And so this is what he does. From this week's Torah portion, the book of Genesis. And Isaac said to Jacob, please come closer so that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. He saw something's amiss and he said, that's it, I want to feel you because I know if I feel you, I'll know if it's Esau or if it's Jacob. So Jacob drew near to Isaac, his father, and he felt him, and he said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like the hands of his brother Esau, and he blessed him. And so Isaac gave Jacob the blessings. What were the blessings? Before he blessed him, he continued the conversation, and he said, are you indeed my son Esau? And he said, I am. And he said, serve it to me, the food that you prepared, that I may eat of the game of my son, so that my soul will bless you. And he served him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said to him, please come closer and kiss me, my son. And he came closer, and he kissed him, and he smelled the fragrance of his garments, and he blessed him. And he said, behold, the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field that God has blessed. So yes, he felt him and he saw that he feels like Esau, but the problem is Jacob was a lot more refined. And Jacob's voice was a lot calmer and a lot different than Esau's voice. And on top of that, Jacob, being such a holy Jew, had this special fragrance that traveled with him. It was like a fragrance from the Garden of Eden. It was a special fragrance. And so he said, I smell this special fragrance that God has blessed you. It doesn't tell us here what the blessing is. In the subsequent verses, it tells us what the blessings are. The verse continues, and this is the blessing. And may God give you of the dew of the heavens and of the fatness of the earth and an abundance of grain and wine. Nations shall serve you, and kingdoms shall bow down to you. You shall be a master over your brothers, and your mother's sons shall bow down to you. Those who curse you shall be cursed, and those who bless you shall be blessed. It's beautiful blessings, it's materialistic blessings, it's spiritual goodness. It evokes security, strength, showering of divine goodwill for the generations to come. Now we see why Jacob and Esau both wanted these blessings. And as a matter of fact, Esau comes back and he finds out that his brother stole the blessings from him, and he vows to avenge the rights of the blessing, even though ultimately Jacob legally was deserving of the blessings, aside from spiritually deserving of the blessings, legally was deserving of the blessings because the blessings were for the firstborn, and Jacob had purchased fair and square the firstborn rights from Esau. But let's analyze these blessings. How does the blessings begin? And may God give you of the dew. Hold on a second. Isaac's beginning the blessing, and he begins with, and may God give you, right? We all learned in grammar that you never begin a sentence with and, unless you're feeding off someone else's speech or whatever it may be. But a sentence in and of itself, Isaac is beginning to give blessings. What does it mean when Isaac says, and may God give you? Shouldn't he have began the blessings with, may God give you? And if you see it in the Hebrew says, ve'yitem lacha. The Hebrew letter vav, connotes the idea and is a translation of and. So why does it begin with and? And Rashi, the foremost commentary on the Torah, our favorite that we quote here, constantly explains and quotes from the Midrash. Explains as follows. And may God give you, may he give and give again. It wasn't just a simple, straightforward blessing. It was a double blessing. When Isaac said, and may God give you, in other words, he was telling him God should give you, and he may give you double. He should give you again. He should give you twice. Not just one blessing, two blessings, twofold blessing. So aside from the beauty of the blessing itself, it's a twofold blessing. But hold it. What does that mean? What type of blessings are we talking about? God should give you a blessing, and he should give you a blessing again. What's the meaning of the blessing that God gave, that God is giving, that Isaac is intending for God to give to Jacob initially? And what's the second round of blessings? What is the meaning of these two rounds of blessings? Even more is that if we're talking about humans, if I give you a blessing, if you give me a blessing, if someone else gives us a blessing, it makes sense the first time around they give a blessing, we give a blessing, and then we remember we forgot something. So we give a second blessing, then we remember we forgot something, we give a third blessing. Or we see that circumstances change, so we give a blessing associated with these new circumstances. But here we're talking about godly blessings. If we're talking about godly blessings, God is blessing Jacob in turn. Then what type of blessings could be missing? When God gives a blessing, he gives a full blessing. He gives the complete blessing. He gives everything which is necessary, both materially and spiritually, in unison. Any type of blessing one can imagine is all included. So when God gives a blessing, and this is a godly blessing that we're talking about, what type of blessing can need a double blessing, to give and to give again? In the words of the Rebbe, what was lacking in the first gift, give, that warranted an additional gift, give again? If we were talking about a human giver, we can understand, even when one gives a very large and abundant gift, at the end of the day, it has a limit, inasmuch as the giver is limited. Therefore, it can be supplemented by an additional gift. But in our case, the giver is God. Certainly, God's first gift is complete and unlimited, as God himself is complete and unlimited. If so, what is added by giving again? And so what today we're going to analyze and try to understand is, what is the meaning of these two gifts? And that's what we're going to focus on the entirety of the class, to understand what are the meanings of the give and the give again. And to begin, we're going to go back just under 2,000 years to the great sage Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. It's an important name to know in general in Jewish history. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a leader of the Jewish people at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple and the beginning of our current exile. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was appointed as the head of the Sanhedrin in the year 50 of the Common Era, and roughly about 20 odd years later is when the temple was destroyed. And he is famous for winning the Roman support for the establishment of the city of Yavne as a stronghold for the continuation of the study of Torah even after the destruction of the temple. And so some may say that thanks to him, and generally he is credited that thanks to him, he effectively saved Judaism as we know it today by saving Yavne and its scholars. So this is not just any scholar in the Talmud, this is the greatest of the great. And the Mishnah in the Ethics of Our Fathers relates that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great sage Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he had 5 prized students. In other words, his greatest students that were part of the transmission of Judaism as we know it today. These weren't just rabbis like myself, little rabbis, little communities. These were rabbis that changed the face of Judaism for the good, for the coming generations until today. These were the greatest of the great. And he relates something interesting about these 5. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 disciples. In other words, he had many more than 5 disciples. He had 5 prized disciples. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. He would recount their praises. Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus is a cemented cistern that doesn't lose a drop. Obviously a reference to a drop of Torah. Whenever he studies Torah, he's a cemented cistern. Whatever goes in doesn't come out, like photographic memory. That was his praise. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, fortunate is she who gave birth to him. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, a chassid, pious one. Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel fears sin in the true meaning of the term. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is as an ever-increasing wellspring. So these 5 students, outstanding. But there are 2 that are even more outstanding. From these 5, there are 2, as the Mishnah continues, 2 very unique ones from these 5. Rabbi Yochanan would say of his students, if all the sages of Israel were to be in 1 cup of a balance scale, and Eliezer ben Hyrcanus were in the other, he would outweigh them all. Why Eliezer ben Hyrcanus? If you recall, what was his praise? His praise was he was like a cemented cistern. Whatever goes in doesn't come out. Photographic memory. He remembers and retains Torah like no one else. And so you place him on the other, he would outweigh them all. That's how great of a sage he was. Abba Shaul said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he continued that Rabbi Yochanan continued and said, if all the sages were to be in 1 cup of a balance scale, and Eliezer ben Hyrcanus included, and Elazar ben Arach were in the other, the latter would outweigh them all. Elazar ben Arach, what was his greatness? His greatness was he was like what was the term that we said? An ever-increasing wellspring. It was a wellspring that kept on giving forth. What's the difference between these 2? What's the idea of a cistern, a cemented cistern, and an ever-increasing wellspring? And we say that an ever-increasing wellspring outweighs them all. He's the most promising because a cemented cistern absorbs everything, takes everything in. Photographic memory doesn't lose anything. But an ever-increasing wellspring not only absorbs everything, but then takes it that step further. It absorbs it, but his mind is fertile ground for that information to germinate and sprouting even more in great abundance. Takes it that step further in abundant, more profound ideas. And he is the most prominent student of all, the ever-increasing wellspring. because there's no limit how far he can go. The cemented cistern is limited, only what his teacher teaches him. The ever-increasing wellspring goes on forever, brings him to heights far beyond anything where his teacher may have taken him. Now back to Isaac's blessings. When Isaac blessings and he gives and gives again, those are the two levels of giving and giving again. One is a level of blessing on the level of a cemented cistern. It's blessing that will come into you and you'll retain the blessing. The second level of give again is those same blessings, but the blessing is that you can take it that step further as an ever-increasing wellspring, as something which will go on and on and on, limitlessness of blessings. Blessing which is ever-increasing. In the words of the Rebbe, the difference between the cemented cistern and the ever-increasing wellspring as applied to Jacob's blessing, the blessing that Jacob received from his father Isaac. Jacob didn't just receive goodness from above, he also received the ability to stand on his own 2 feet, i.e., to develop that goodness in a personal way using his own resources. This is what it means to give and give again. Isaac blessed Jacob that God give him the goodness from above and also give again the ability to use this goodness and strengthen himself with it on his own. Take it and run with it, not just receive it, but use it and utilize it to grow in a never-ending fashion. So yes, when God gives a blessing, it includes everything. The difference between give and give again is give is to receive the blessing, give again is to internalize those blessings and transform them into something which will go on forever. So in other words, Yaakov's first blessing, Jacob's first blessing that he received from Isaac was that he should receive the blessing as a cemented cistern. Give again, the second blessing was that not only as a cemented cistern, but as an ever-increasing wellspring. Now we'll continue and analyze those 2 ideas even further. And that is as follows. In general, there are 2 categories of people. There are tzaddikim, righteous people who've been doing good since the moment they were born. They fulfill all the commandments. They do everything they're supposed to as they're commanded to by God. And then there's the second category, Baalei Teshuvah, penitents, those who return, those who perform Teshuvah, returning to God, returning. They've had ups and downs, they've had bumps in life, and they've overcome those challenges to bring them to new levels, to new heights, to greater heights. The tzaddik, the Holy One, never fails. Always holy, always doing the right thing, always good, always special. He's constantly climbing from one level to the next, never veering to the right or left. The Baal Teshuvah, forget about it. He's the maverick. He's always getting himself into trouble. Instead of following the rules, he finds himself always on the wrong side of the road. And that's a problem. But what's the good news? The good news is that he always comes back. He comes back. He went to the other side of the road, but he comes back. And you know what? The Baal Teshuvah learned on that other side of the street. He learned so much more that the mystic, the tzaddik, the righteous one can never reach. He'll never learn those tricks. He'll never learn those ideas. It's a whole range of experiences and lessons that the tzaddik, the mystic, the righteous one will never have experienced, and therefore will never receive those lessons. And so the Baal Teshuvah takes his experiences that he received on that other side of the street and transforms them into a deeper and more meaningful mission in serving God. And the Talmud tells us that by using those experiences for positive use, for service of God, the Baal Teshuvah then takes his sins and transforms them into merits. Here's a quote from the Talmud. Reish Lakish, that was his name, said, "Great is repentance, for it transforms one's sins into merits." As the verse states, and when a wicked man repents of his wickedness and performs justice and righteousness, he shall live because of them, because of his wickedness. In other words, he takes his sins and he transforms them into merits by utilizing the lessons and experiences that he had for the service of God. Who's the one who's teaching this lesson? Reish Lakish. We couldn't have had a better person to teach us this lesson. Who was Reish Lakish? Reish Lakish was the head of a band of thieves. He was the greatest thief, the greatest highway robber of his time. And at one point he had to go at Rabbi Yochanan, trying to wield his craft against the great sage Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan managed to turn him. What's the story? Here the Talmud relates the story. One day, Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan River, and Reish Lakish saw him and jumped into the Jordan pursuing him. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Your strength is fit for Torah study." Reish Lakish replied, "Your beauty is fit for women." Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "If you return to a life of Torah, I will marry you off to my sister, who is even more beautiful than I am." Reish Lakish accepted upon himself to study Torah. Rabbi Yochanan taught him Tanakh, which is the Torah, the prophets, and the scriptures, and Mishnah, and turned him into a great man, a great scholar. When Reish Lakish died, and needless to say, that's the needless to say, Reish Lakish became one of the greatest sages of all times. And indeed, he did marry Rabbi Yochanan's sister. When Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan was exceedingly pained. When you go through the pages of the Talmud and you see discussions between sages, there was these pairs of sages that constantly discussed. They were the discussion partners, the arguing partners, and they would sharpen each other's minds. Rabbi Yochanan's study partner was Reish Lakish. And all over the Talmud, whenever you study any tractate of Talmud and you come across Reish Lakish, you'll see Rabbi Yochanan somewhere there. You come across Rabbi Yochanan, you'll see Reish Lakish somewhere there in the Talmud. Because they each fed off each other, they studied each other, they sharpened each other's mind. And so when Rabbi Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan was exceedingly pained. The rabbi said, "Who will go to calm him?" And they said, "Let Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat go." So he is proficient in Torah study, as he's proficient in Torah study. Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat went and sat before him. Every time Rabbi Yochanan would cite a teaching, Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat would say, "There's a ruling taught in a Braita that supports your opinion." "You're right," he would tell him. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, to Elazar ben Pedat, "Are you like the son of Lakish? The son of Lakish, when I would cite a teaching before him, instead of supporting my idea, he would raise 24 difficulties attempting to prove me wrong. And I would furnish him with 24 answers supporting my claim. In this fashion, the study was broadened. And yet you tell me that there is a Braita substantiating me? Do I not know that I am speaking sense?" And here's the key. Rabbi Yochanan went around rending his clothing, weeping and saying, "Where are you, son of Lakish? Where are you, son of Lakish?" He missed him. He missed his study partner. He missed the ultimate study partner. Why? The sages tried to comfort Rabbi Yochanan by giving him someone, an equally great Torah scholar, Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat, who would agree with everything he would say. He was fit to study with Rabbi Yochanan. But he didn't have that same questioning edge that Reish Lakish had. That analytical, viewing each situation from each side, from every angle possible, that Reish Lakish had. Where did Reish Lakish have that power from? He had that from his past as a thief. He had that from his past as a gangster, where he'd analyze every situation. And he utilized those talents, which were used in the past for something negative. He transformed them into something holy. And so he became a greater scholar. He became the greatest scholars. Indeed, as we see in this case, Reish Lakish's sins were transformed into merits. In other words, what did Reish Lakish do? He wasn't just a cemented cistern that absorbed everything he was taught. He was an ever-increasing wellspring. He always thought of new ideas. He utilized these new concepts that Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat would have never been able to receive because they did not have that past life. And so back to this idea, a tzaddik, a great sage, is the perfect container for Torah study. Retains everything, is a cemented cistern. Every value, every teaching, every law he learns goes straight into his life, straight into practice, straight into Torah study. He does exactly what he's supposed to do, and he does it perfectly. The Baal Teshuvah, by contrast, it's not about being a cemented cistern, but he has something that the tzaddik, the greatest mystic, doesn't have. And that is the ability to infuse his positive contribution to the world with his own unique flavor, his past. Exactly like Reish Lakish did. True, he didn't always follow the manual, but you know what? Through not following the manual, the upside is that when he comes back, he can go much further than the tzaddik himself would have been able to go. The advantage of the ever-increasing wellspring is his limitlessness, which the cemented cistern lacks. Similarly, the advantage of the Baalei Teshuvah is that their spiritual work is not restricted. As we know, tzaddikim, the righteous, operate in a very orderly, measured way, advancing one step after another. But the Baal Teshuvah can jump every hurdle, advancing without taking the steps. Not to confuse the holy with the mundane, but a good example would be General Patton, right? We all know him. We love him, we hate him. But General Patton, one of the greatest generals. What was so unique about him? Many things. But one famous character trait that he had was his non-ability to follow his higher-ups. And sometimes he'd flat out say no. Other times the message would be lost in communication until it was convenient for him to find it again. I never knew you said that. But what happened? Because he had these unique character traits, because he went against the grain, because he was able to not listen, to be like that wayward, go on the other side of the street, not listen to what he was told, he was able to achieve great things that other people would never be able to achieve. Like Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, by having such a past, he was able to reach greater than even Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat was able to reach. So now we see that back to the blessing of Jacob. The blessing that Isaac gave Jacob was this double blessing. Isaac was telling Jacob that you are now beginning to be the father of a nation. The Jewish people, you're going to have 12 children. And you know what? Amongst their descendants, there's going to be the tzaddikim, there's going to be the righteous ones, and there's going to be the Baalei Teshuvah, the ones that will deviate from the path, but they're going to come back. You should know that the blessing that you're getting from God is not just a blessing for the righteous one. It's a blessing for everyone. And not only that, a blessing for everyone, it's a greater blessing for those that have deviated from the past to a degree. Because those who have deviated from the past, they will give again. God will give again. God will give them blessings because what they can achieve is greater than what the tzaddik themselves can achieve. By going to that other side of the street, by having that crooked past, and then being able to come back from it, that coming back from it gives them a greater advantage enabling them to transform sins into merits. And the Talmud takes it a step further. And the Talmud tells us, as we've spoken many times, when we do a mitzvah with a physical object, say this cup, this computer we're all using, we're now taking this computer and revealing the godly spark in it. Until now, it was mundane. It could be used for holiness. It could be used for the opposite. By us using it and utilizing it for Torah study, we are now transforming it into something holy, revealing the godly spark within it. And that's our mission, that we have to reveal the godly spark within everything. But hold on. How about a good ham sandwich? Yeah? Bacon and eggs in the morning. How do we take that bacon and reveal the godly spark in it? How do we take that bacon and utilize it and elevate it for holiness? I can't go ahead and eat it. God forbid, it's not kosher. How do we reveal the holiness in that? So our sages tell us that when a Baal Teshuvah, when a repentant goes ahead And he or she may have eaten those things in the past. And then they transform themselves and they now become true to who they are. They start fulfilling the commandments. They now are using that energy that they received from something which is not kosher. Only they can reveal the godliness within those areas, not us, not those people who do what God wants. So they, in essence, to a certain degree, when they come back, they can reach a greater level than the greatest sage can possibly reach. Never lose hope, is what Isaac is telling Jacob. Even those that seem that they may have lost the blessing, nope, they didn't lose the blessing, because God gives and gives again. He gives the blessing, the initial blessing, like the cemented cistern, like the tzaddik, the mystics, who are holy, who are righteous, who are good, who do everything right. They never deviate from the path. They get the blessings. But then God says, it's not just them. V'yachzar v'yitin, and give again. Because I'm going to give the blessings a second time. That second time is to that second level of people who are not only equal, but in a sense, they're even greater than the first level. The Baalei Teshuvah, penitents, those who return, those who find their way after they were lost. It emerges that the blessing Jacob received that God give and give again includes not only spiritual and physical goodness, including both benefits, the full blessing itself, as well as the ability to develop it on his own, right? Which was the first level of the double blessing that we explained, that one is the blessing itself, and the other one is to develop that blessing and use its limitlessness for further blessing. Not only that, but it's also twofold within the Jewish people. Rather, it also includes the ability from above to live by both models of spiritual growth. The tzaddik model represented by God giving, as well as the Baal Teshuvah model represented by God giving again. And so it's not only a double level of blessing, but it's a double level to both categories within the Jewish nation. Now we're going to get into something even more unique. And that is within the path of the Baal Teshuvah, within the path of the penitent. When does he receive the blessing? What is that aspect of his penitence? What is that aspect of his returning to Judaism? When does those blessings take place? And we see it with a nuance within the beginning of the story. If you recall, what did Isaac smell when Jacob walked up to him? He smelled the fragrance of God. The fragrance of a field that God has blessed. What does that verse mean? We'll look at those two verses again. And his father Isaac said to him, "Please come closer and kiss me, my son." And he came closer, and he kissed him, and he smelled the fragrance of his garments, and he blessed him, and he said, "Behold, the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field that God has blessed." Isaac's blessings were not just merely blessings to Jacob. They were blessings of an eternal cosmic significance till the end of times. It wasn't just about rain and grain. It was about the future mandate of the Jewish people. It was a blessing for all categories of Jews, for the mystics, for the sages, and for the penitents, for all generations to come. And the Midrash applies this cosmic significance to this aspect of this story, seemingly trivial, but of great importance, as the introduction to the blessing. And the Midrash explains as follows. Isaac's statement, "Behold the fragrance of my son," refers to the sacrifices as a pleasing fragrance. Like the fragrance of a field, refers to a vision of the temple destroyed, as the verse states, "Because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field." That God has blessed refers to a vision of the perfectly rebuilt temple in the time of the Messiah, Mashiach, as the verse states, "For there God commanded the blessing, life forever." What's this introductory anecdote tell us? What it's telling us is as follows, says the Midrash. Isaac had a vision just before giving the blessing to Jacob. He had this vision of the first temple being built, its existence, and its destruction. And then he had the vision of the final temple, of its being built in its glory. So he had three parts to his vision: the initial build temple, the destruction of the temple, and then the rebuilding of the final temple, the third temple. Where do we see it in the verse? For those who have once asked me in the past, what is drush? What is homiletics? This is a homiletic explanation in the verse. The Midrash explains as follows. In Hebrew, the word bini can mean son, or if you switch around the vowels, it can mean built. And so what the verse over here says, see that the fragrance of my son is like this fragrance of a field. The fragrance of my son can also be referring to the fragrance of a built building. And what does fragrance refer to? What's the fragrance that is in that building? Elsewhere in the Levitical laws, it refers to sacrifices as a fragrance for God. In other words, it's a reference to the first temple, the standing temples. Isaac had a vision of the standing temples. And then he said, Sadeh, the fragrance of a field. Later in the book of Zechariah, the prophet associates a destroyed temple with a field, a barren field. And so it's an allusion to Isaac's vision of seeing the destroyed temple. But then the verse continues and says, Asher Berchai Hashem, that God has blessed. That's a reference to the ultimate temple. May it be speedily rebuilt in our days. The third temple, which is referred to in the verse as a blessing. And so what's this verse telling us? That Isaac had this unique vision. The building of the temple, the destruction of the temple, and the building. And hold on. We're talking about Isaac giving blessings to Jacob. If you're giving blessings, why is part of your vision the destruction of the temple? Shouldn't the vision just be of the built temples? Granted, you want to have a triple vision, have a vision of the first temple, a vision of the second temple, a vision of the third temple. Why have a vision of the destruction of the temple? Is this a blessing or is this a curse? Is this talking about destruction or is this talking about rebuilding? Why have a vision of a plowed field, a time of destruction and failure? Is he scaring Jacob? Is he scaring Jews in the generations to come that there's going to be a time of destruction? But now, based on the deeper meaning of the blessing, that we now understand what the blessings are all about, this introduction makes perfect sense. Yaakov got a double blessing, right? Give, which we said was a reference to the tzaddik, the mystic's way, path of spiritual growth, and give again the Teshuvah, the penitence path of spiritual growth. Similarly in this introduction, Isaac's vision of a built temple, initially built, a beautiful temple, doing everything that God wants, that represents the path of the tzaddik, of the righteous one. It's a beautiful temple, it's perfect, it's all great. By contrast, the plowed field, followed by a vision of the perfect temple, that's a vision of the Baal Teshuvah, the penitent, who has to go through that plowed field moment, that moment of destruction, that moment of feeling lost, of feeling forlorn, of feeling entirely confused. I don't know where I am. I'm a Jew. I have a soul. Am I doing what am I supposed to be doing? Or have I totally lost the plot? Have I totally lost it? I haven't put on tefillin for so many years. I haven't kept Shabbos. I haven't eaten kosher. I haven't done so many things. And we have that aha moment, that moment of realization. I don't even know who I am. That's the destruction, the years of destruction, the moment of a plowed field. Says the vision of Isaac before he gives the blessing to Jacob. Not all is lost, because following the plowed field comes the temple, but which temple? The perfectly rebuilt temple that will be rebuilt in the time of Mashiach. The ultimate temple, which will be an everlasting temple. In other words, what Isaac is telling Jacob, your descendants will have the temple, those righteous ones who start off as a temple who are perfect, and then from your descendants will be those who will be like a plowed field. They'll be in destruction, but you know what? There's hope for them. Because what comes after a plowed field? A plowed field, if you look at it on the outset, superficially, just looks like a destroyed field. But deep down, you know there's things working there. Out of a plowed field, if you plant, suddenly grows. Grows beautiful trees. But first, you have to plow that field. You have to destroy the field, but the destruction of the field is really its preparation for what's coming next, a beautiful temple. So why do we mention the destruction now? The temple, as it was first built before it was ever destroyed, represents the path of the tzaddikim, who walk the straight path, etc. By contrast, the temple's destruction and subsequent complete rebuilding with the Messiah represent the path of Teshuvah, which follows decline and destruction. It makes sense then that the temple's destruction is included in the preamble to Isaac's blessing. It matches the theme of the blessing, namely that God give and give again. Together they are the tools for the path of tzaddikim as well as the path of the Baalei Teshuvah. Both the temple standing, the destruction of the temple, and the rebuilding of the temple. Because you know what? Destruction is not destruction. It's renewal. It's the beginning of the next part. Right? I always joke, in Chabad, you're never late. You're just early for the next part. Similarly over here, the destruction of the temple wasn't the destruction of the past temple. It was plowing the ground for the future temple. A Baal Teshuvah, a penitent, when he goes off the path, a Jew goes off the path, deviates left or right, veers from the correct path, what God wants us to do. It's painful. Once there's a realization of what was done, once a realization of someone who went left, right, someone who went off the path, feels knocked down, feels like they're now a plowed field, they're destroyed. Not only doesn't he remember who you're supposed to be, not only is he not who he's supposed to be, he doesn't even remember who he's supposed to be. He's totally lost. And the lost feeling of this individual is part of Teshuvah. It is Teshuvah. It's recognizing how far one has become. As Maimonides says, among the paths of repentance is for the penitent to constantly call out before God, crying and entreating, perform charity according to his potential, separate himself far from the object of his sin, change his name as if to say, I am a different person and not the same one who sinned, change his behavior in its entirety to the good and the path of righteousness, and travel in exile from his home. Exile atones for sin because it causes a person to be submissive, humble, and meek in spirit. And you know what? Let's talk about Reish Lakish, that sage. Imagine Reish Lakish, who's coming from the fields, is coming from the forest of being that highway robber, of being that professional thief. And him walking into the study hall for that first time. Imagine what he must have felt like. Totally out of place. Probably didn't even know what proper dress to wear, dress code in the study hall. Felt entirely lost and forlorn, broken, like a plowed field. But you know what? A person in such a situation shouldn't feel like a plowed field. They should feel like a plowed field if they know what the purpose of a plowed field is. The purpose of a plowed field isn't to remain desolate, isn't to remain destroyed, isn't to remain entirely devoid of what's supposed to be there. It's actually preparing it to create fertile ground for the further growth, something greater than it was in and of itself, something beyond what it itself could have accomplished, something much better than it initially was. The growth of a beautiful field, of orchards, of vineyards, whatever is intended to be planted there. So when a person finds himself that lost, that broken, that in-between spot, falling off a track, let's not get stuck in the sadness of the moment. Yes, the sadness may be something that will push us to recognize where we are, but you know what? Let's not get stuck in the moment. Let's forge on and know that this is not, being lost is not where we're supposed to be at. Let's go find ourselves, because you know what? This stage of being lost is perfect. A plowed field, fertile ground for now something even greater to be. Come of this individual. Remind me of a joke, the famous joke, Jews like to kvetch. We always like to kvetch. There was a train cabin A few people traveling in the train cabin, and Chaim is sitting there and he's kvetching, "Oi, I'm so thirsty. Oi, am I thirsty? Oi, am I thirsty?" The guy in the train cabin, Jack, he can't handle it anymore. Or Christopher can't handle it anymore. And he decides he's going to bring Chaim a cup of water. He goes, he brings him a cup of water. He comes back into his cabin. It's just him and Chaim. He gives him the cup of water. And he figures, I'll finally get some peace and quiet. Not a minute goes by after drinking the water, and Chaim starts kvetching, "Oi, was I thirsty. Oi, was I thirsty." We like to kvetch. But you know what? It's not about the kvetching. It's about moving forward. Yes, we failed. Yes, we fell. But you know what? That failing, falling, is just a plowed field. It's a plowed field where now, if we only recognize it, we'll be able to plant and will sprout forth a beautiful tree, beautiful growth, the third temple. For Teshuvah to produce the desired result, it must be geared in the right direction. Underlying the sorrow and regret one feels must be the purpose, fulfilling the Torah and the mitzvahs henceforth. Therefore, the plowed field refers not only to the feelings of brokenness, but also to the growth Teshuvah produces. And so when we mess up, when a Jew messes up, we don't wring our hands together, pull our hair out of our head and say, "What's going to be?" We say, "What can I do about it? What am I going to do about it? How am I going to transform this plowed field, this broken me, this plowed moment, this plowed, destroyed moment? How am I going to transform it into a plowed field that will yield tremendous produce, the produce of Teshuvah?" In the words of the previous Rebbe, quoted by the Rebbe in the famous book, Hayom Yom, my father, the Rebbe Rashab, writes in one of his letters, "A single act is better than 1,000 groans." We love kvetching. We love saying, "Oi, this is not good. Oi, that's not good. Oi, the next thing's not good." We love it. But that's not it. A single action is better than 1,000 groans. Our God lives, and Torah and mitzvahs are eternal. Quit the groaning and work hard in actual service of God, and God will be gracious to you. It reminds me of another joke where Chaim Yankel, he hurts himself, he hurts his back, he's got to go in for emergency surgery, and they take him to the best hospital in town. They take him to Mass General, bring him to Mass General, and he's being treated like a king. A few weeks passed, and one of his good friends found out that he transferred out of Mass General, and he went to a little local clinic in the Lower East Side. He comes to the little local clinic to visit his friend Chaim Yankel, who was transferred from Mass General, and he says, "Chaim Yankel, what are you doing in this dilapidated place? The paint is coming off the wall. The Mass General, what was there? What was wrong with the doctors? Not good?" And he says, "No, I can't complain about the doctors. They were great." He says, "How about the nurses? Were they not good?" He says, "No, I can't complain about the nurses. They were great." He says, "Okay, maybe the food wasn't good." He says, "No, I can't complain about the food either. The food is great." He says, "If so, why'd you move here to this little clinic in the Lower East Side?" He says, "Because here I could complain." It's not all about complaining. A single act is better than 1,000 groans. So when we reach a rough patch, whether collectively or personally, we reach a rough patch, and we notice that we've made a series of poor decisions. And we sometimes think back and we think, "Oh, I wasted a few years of my life, a few moments of my life, a few hours, a few days, a few months, whatever it may be, a few decades." We can wallow in our sorrow and start groaning, 1,000 groans. And you know what? They're all correct. We're not kvetching for no reason. We're kvetching for good reason. We've done something wrong. We failed. We fell. We reached a point of brokenness. But you know what? It's not where it stops. It's not where it stops. We have to recognize that moment, that aha moment, that moment of brokenness, really a plowed field. And we're going to take that plowed field and we're going to transform it into the ultimate temple, the third temple. We're going to transform it into a moment of growth, into a moment where we'll grow even greater than we ever were from the get-go. And then that plowed field moment is actually part of our growth process. And that's why Isaac had that as part of his vision. And that's why God gave the blessing to Jacob and in turn to every single one of the Jewish people. Give and give. A double giving. the giving, the initial giving for the mystics, the initial giving for the simple blessings, for the blessings just to receive the blessings and the blessings of the tzaddikim. And he will give the second round of blessings, that round 4, following the plowed field to transform that into a temple. And so we should all recognize the courage that we have, the strength that we have. We should all have the courage to recognize the strength that we have, to take those moments of brokenness and recognize that it's not brokenness, rather it's a plowed field moment. And we can take that plowed field moment and transform it into a beautiful orchard. And then, God willing, when we each take our plowed field moment, God will take the plowed field of the temple and transform it into the third temple. May it be built speedily in our time. Thank you all for joining.